Wisconsin once again played a vital role in deciding who wins the White House. The state also lived up to its reputation as a swing state, with one party securing a Senate seat, another winning the presidential contest. Our CBS 58 Capitol correspondent Emilee Fannon takes a closer look with WisPolitics' JR Ross at the split ticket results and whether Republicans can recreate Trump's pathway to victory.
Another historic election here in Wisconsin and nationwide, with one of the biggest political comebacks in American history, with former President Donald Trump winning the popular vote and also flipping Wisconsin and some other key battleground states. Let's first just start with some of the takeaways. You know, Vice President Kamala Harris did get overall more votes compared to 4 years ago against President Joe Biden. But simply looking at the map here in Wisconsin, the former president was just able to make gains almost in many counties, and that is ultimately what carried him over the edge here in Wisconsin. What are some of the takeaways from you, JR?
It's the economy. I mean, look, people are doing all these kind of pronouncements about Democrats are problems with working class voters, which, you know, true in this election. But I would just caution people to kind of take the big picture view of, I can't remember any election in my lifetime where people aren't happy about the economy, the direction of the country, and their own personal situation, and voted for the party in power. It doesn't happen. Harris had troubles. I mean, she couldn't articulate a way that she was going to do something differently than what Joe Biden did. That's a problem. Joe Biden's unpopular. That's a problem. She had 107 days, whatever it was, to run. That's a problem. I don't know anybody else could overcome, though, the general wave in this country of the economy drove things. Donald Trump has his detractors for sure, has his negatives for sure, but people feel like, it seems, I want to pay less for stuff and feel better about what's coming out of my checkbook every week when I pay my bills. Yeah,
Democrats telling me this week it was just way too many economic headwinds that it was too difficult for her to overcome, bottom line. Of course, the former president did perform very well, especially with white male voters. But looking at the WOW counties, that's Washington, Ozaukee, and Washington, he underperformed in every single one of those. Typically Republican leaning, but some of them, like Waukesha, have been turning a little bit more purple compared to 2020. Meanwhile, Harris did much better in those areas compared to 4 years ago than President Joe Biden. But the question ahead here, JR, is can Republicans in the state Supreme Court race next year and in the midterms in 2026, can they recreate Trump's pathway to victory without hitting certain regions in the WOW counties? Can they do that again in those races?
It'll be a challenge. Talking to people this week, I mean, we observed, I can't remember any Republican or conservative in any race whatsoever in Wisconsin winning statewide below 59% in Waukesha County. Scott Walker used to get 70% plus there just a few years ago, but there's that erosion. Now, Trump overcame that because of surge in other places. I mean, Dane County went a little bit less blue, which was a surprise. Rural areas turned out. How do Republicans stitch together that rural vote, those first-time voters, the bro vote, whatever we're going to call it, it turned out for him when Trump's not on the ballot? That is a challenge because those voters in Waukesha County and Washington, Ozaukee, they show up every election, midterm, special, Supreme Court, on down the road, and they're voting Democratic more and more. If you can't get those numbers back up in the WOW counties and keep the rural vote, you face a tough task. Now, Trump did it. He's unique, though. There's no other Donald Trump that I know of in this country as a politician. Ron Johnson won in 2022. A little bit better in Waukesha County and the WOW counties than Trump did. He showed the formula there. But how do Republicans find that formula going forward? Because going back to 2016, I can count on one hand the number of races they've won in Wisconsin statewide. That's a challenge that they have to figure out going forward to sustain this momentum they got out of this election.
And Wisconsin also showed its true purple colors on Tuesday after we elected a Democrat to U.S. Senate and elected a Republican president. This is the first time that this has happened since 1968. Now, granted, yes, it was 2 years ago that we saw another split ticket with Senator Ron Johnson and Governor Tony Evers winning re-election, but this is just different because we're talking about, you know, congressional federal elections. You know, some of the takeaways here is looking at Baldwin. She did perform better in certain areas than Harris, but Harris also performed better in the WOW counties. I mean, it's all this kind of mixed bag, but in the end, I think it just goes to proven track record with Tammy Baldwin. She performs well with farmers. She performs well in rural areas. And Eric Hovde, the Republican challenger, just didn't hit those certain thresholds. He actually performed worse in almost every county than Trump did.
And that could be his negatives. Now, I know some Republicans want to say Thomas Leger, who's America First Party candidate, would cause Hovde to lose. I talked to people this past week, and they kind of cautioned that assumption because there's a couple of things. One, looking at the unofficial returns so far, Baldwin's margin is larger than the number of votes that Leger got by a few hundred votes, but even in election of 3.4 million cast, if you do a recount, you don't change a couple hundred votes, let alone 30,000, okay? But those folks who voted for Thomas Leaguer, they knew that Trump liked Eric Hovde. There's no doubt about that. They campaigned together. Trump endorsed Hovde. RFK Jr. endorsed Hovde. There's no question Hovde was Trump's guy. So if you are a Trump supporter, why don't you vote for Eric Hovde? Is it the California bank, the California mansion, the comments you made about group X, Y, and Z in these ads? The last Marquette poll has negatives at -12. So he was upside down with voters. That may be what did him in, that Tammy Baldwin has a great reputation for working and getting just enough of that crossover vote, and he couldn't quite go over that hump of being viewed negatively by the public.
And looking ahead, we're going to have a much different makeup here in the state legislature at the Capitol. Kind of the headlines and the takeaways out of those races, the first ones, a lot of them under the new legislative competitive maps, is that Assembly Republicans maintain their majority despite there being a pathway for Democrats. Republicans only lost 10 seats. Meanwhile, in the Senate, a good night for Democrats. I mean, they flipped 4 seats, or gained 4 seats, excuse me, beat 2 Republican incumbents to reduce the majority from a 22-11 to now an 18-15 split, which does now create a pathway for them to possibly get the majority in 2 years.
So the Assembly first, those maps, there's a path for majority for Democrats, but they need a good top-of-ticket performance. Harris couldn't pull them across the finish line. She had to win by a couple points likely to create the opportunities to win the majority. Now, the party part of the White House almost always struggles in midterms. So I don't want to talk about 26 already, but looking ahead 2 years, Democrats, they've already got their races circled. Okay, we can go here, here, and here, defend this. We've got a path to try and win the majority. The Senate, that path got wider. They needed to net 3 seats and had 4. They've got 3 seats they could pick up in 2026, 1 to defend. Their life got easier to try and flip this chamber in 2026 after Tuesday.
All right, that will do it for this week. Thanks so much for joining us.